My name is Sarah Jenkins. I'm 32 years old, and I'm the founder of a smart home technology company. The clatter of forks on ceramic and the low hum of conversation felt like a cruel backdrop that Tuesday. My mother, Eleanor, sat across from me, her perfectly manicured hand gripping the edge of the linen tablecloth. "Honestly, Sarah," she said, her voice dropping to a stage whisper that still carried, "if you're going to continue living like a squatter, then I simply can't associate with it. You need to leave. Now." She gestured vaguely towards the restaurant exit, her eyes narrowed. I felt a hot flush creep up my neck, but I simply nodded, pushing my untouched plate of salmon away. She wanted me out? Fine. But she had no idea the squatter she was dismissing had just closed on a place that would make her jaw drop to the floor. And she was going to see it sooner than she thought. To understand why a grown woman would tolerate being publicly dismissed by her own mother, you need to know Eleanor. She wasn't a monster, not in the way villains are in stories. She was just Eleanor. From the time I was a little girl, everything in our lives, from my clothes to my hobbies, was carefully curated to fit her vision of success and propriety. She had a particular fondness for a delicate porcelain bird figurine, a family heirloom that sat on the mantelpiece. "It needs a proper display, Sarah," she'd often say, tracing its smooth, white curves. "A home that truly reflects its beauty and value." It wasn't just about the bird, it was about the kind of home, the kind of life, she believed we should have. My father, bless his quiet soul, was an accountant. He worked hard, provided well, but never challenged Eleanor's pronouncements. So, I grew up with the understanding that my primary role was to achieve, and to achieve in a way that reflected well on her. When I chose to study computer science at the State University instead of pursuing a more ladylike degree at an Ivy League, it was the first crack in her perfect facade. "Coding, Sarah? Are you sure you won't just end up in a basement somewhere, talking to machines?" she'd asked, her voice laced with disappointment. I was 18 then, full of naive optimism that my success would eventually win her over. After graduation, I launched my first startup, a small venture developing smart home security systems. It was a shoestring operation, working out of a cramped co-working space, then later, a slightly less cramped apartment I shared with 2 other developers. Eleanor never missed an opportunity to remind me that I wasn't living up to my potential. She'd call, not to ask about my work, but to suggest I apply for a position at a major tech company, or, even better, marry a successful lawyer she knew. "You're 26, Sarah. Time is ticking. You need stability, a proper home." That phrase, "a proper home," was her constant refrain. It always came back to the porcelain bird, needing its perfect display. The real pressure began around my 30th birthday. My company, Connect Home, was starting to gain traction, but it was still in the fundraising phase, which meant my personal income was modest. I'd poured every penny back into the business. Eleanor had always assumed I was struggling. She'd invite me to lunch at places like the Oak Room, then discreetly slide a $20 bill across the table when she thought no one was looking, whispering, "For groceries, dear." It was humiliating, especially when my net worth on paper was already well into 7 figures, tied up in the company. I couldn't tell her. Not yet. Her idea of modest was a sprawling suburban house with a meticulously kept garden, not a startup founder's apartment. One afternoon, about 6 months before that fateful lunch, Eleanor called me, her voice tight with disapproval. "Sarah, your cousin Jessica just bought a beautiful new condo in the city. 2 bedrooms, a balcony overlooking the park. She's only 28. Don't you think it's time you settled down somewhere respectable?" Jessica was a marketing manager at a pharmaceutical company, a job Eleanor approved of. I mumbled something about being happy where I was, but the call left a bitter taste. It wasn't just about the condo, it was about the constant comparison, the implication that I was failing to achieve the life she had mapped out for me. That detail mattered later. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. I decided then that I wouldn't just succeed, I would succeed on my own terms, and I would keep it quiet until I was ready. Over the next year, Connect Home truly took off. We secured a major investment round, our user base exploded, and the valuation soared. My personal stake became substantial. I could have bought a nice condo like Jessica's, or even a house in a good neighborhood. But I had a different vision. I started quietly working with a real estate agent, looking at properties that were, frankly, beyond anything Eleanor could have imagined for me. I wanted a place that wasn't just big, but smart, sustainable, and a canvas for the very technology one was building. A place that would be the ultimate proper home for my definition of success. The house I found was a modern marvel, nestled on a hillside overlooking the city, with panoramic views. It had been designed by a famous architect and featured cutting-edge smart home infrastructure, perfect for showcasing Connect Home's capabilities. It was a mansion, truly. Not a sprawling, traditional estate, but a sleek, minimalist structure with floor-to-ceiling windows, an infinity pool, and integrated AI systems. The purchase was complex, involving non-disclosure agreements and a tight closing schedule, but I managed to keep it completely under wraps. I told my parents I was too busy with work to visit much, which was true enough. I thought that was the worst of it, the secrecy. It wasn't. The week before our ill-fated lunch, Eleanor had upped her campaign. She'd found out, through a mutual friend, that I was no longer living in the shared apartment. I had moved into a temporary rental while the mansion's final touches were being completed. This temporary place was smaller, less impressive than my previous co-living space, and certainly not what she'd call respectable. She called it a step backward. She interpreted my silence about my new living situation as shame, proof that I was truly floundering. She even suggested I move back home, just until you get back on your feet. The implication was clear, I was a charity case, an embarrassment. That Tuesday, when we met at the Oak Room, I knew something was brewing. Eleanor had a specific glint in her eye. She started by listing all the ways I was falling short: no stable partner, no respectable address, no real job in a corporation. She spoke about how my choices reflected on her, how her bridge club friends were starting to ask questions. "It's embarrassing, Sarah," she'd said, her voice tight with barely suppressed anger. "I've worked my whole life to build a certain standing in this community, and your bohemian lifestyle is undermining it." She paused, then delivered the final blow. "I can't have you living in that hovel. It's simply not acceptable. If you're not going to make an effort to live properly, then I can't pretend otherwise." That's when she told me to leave. I walked out of the Oak Room, the chill of the air conditioning still clinging to my skin, and got into my car. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't about my well-being, it was about her image. And I was done playing by her rules. I drove straight to my new mansion, the keys feeling heavy and real in my pocket. I spent the afternoon walking through the empty rooms, the silence echoing my newfound resolve. The porcelain bird motif flashed in my mind. Eleanor wanted a proper display for her bird, a proper home for me. Well, I had built one. My own. The next day, I sent Eleanor a text message. Not an apology, not a plea. Just an address, a date, and a time. "Mom, please come to this address tomorrow at 3 p.m. I have something to show you." She replied almost immediately, a single question mark. I didn't respond. I knew she wouldn't resist the lure of a mystery, especially one that might involve me finally getting my act together. She probably imagined I was showing her a new, slightly better apartment, or perhaps even a fiancé. At 2:55 p.m. the following day, a sleek black car pulled up the winding driveway of my new property. Eleanor stepped out, looking impeccable in a tailored suit, her expression a mix of curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. She took in the modern facade of the house, her eyebrows raising slightly. This was clearly not a hovel. As she walked towards the front door, I met her on the expansive porch, the city glittering in the distance behind me. "Sarah, what is this place?" she asked, her voice hushed, a hint of awe mixing with her usual suspicion. "It's my new home, Mom," I said, my voice calm, steady. I unlocked the oversized pivot door and pushed it open, revealing the soaring ceilings, the minimalist interior, and the breathtaking panoramic view from the living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating a space that felt both grand and intimately connected to its surroundings. She stepped inside, her eyes wide, slowly turning in a circle. Her gaze swept over the polished concrete floors, the custom-built furniture, the discreetly integrated smart panels on the walls. This is yours," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She walked towards the windows, looking out at the city she usually only saw from her own, much smaller, suburban home. "Yes, Mom. This is where I live now. And this is where Connect Home's new R&D lab will be, in the lower level." I gestured to a discreet staircase. "It's got everything I need for my work, and for my life." I watched her, waiting for the inevitable critique, the comparison. But for once, she was silent, truly speechless. She walked through the kitchen, touching the smooth quartz countertops, peering into the smart refrigerator. She even ventured into one of the guest bedrooms, her perfectly coiffed head shaking slightly. Finally, she came back to the living room, standing by a large, abstract sculpture that dominated one wall. "But, the furniture. It's so modern. Where's your china cabinet? Your things?" She still couldn't quite grasp it. It wasn't the home she would have chosen. "My things are here, Mom," I said, gesturing around the minimalist space. "And the china cabinet doesn't really fit the aesthetic." I watched her carefully. She still didn't understand the full scope of my success, only the visual evidence. She walked over to a small side table, her eyes scanning the surface. I knew what she was looking for. The porcelain bird. Her perfect vision of a home. I had deliberately chosen not to bring it, or anything like it, into this space. This was my vision. She turned back to me, her expression unreadable. You bought this with your coding money?" she asked, the old dismissiveness still trying to surface, but failing under the weight of the reality around her. "Yes, Mom," I replied, allowing a small, knowing smile to touch my lips. "With my coding money. And it's not a hovel." The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't a triumphant silence, but a settling one. She looked around one last time, then back at me. There was no apology for her words at lunch, of course. That wasn't Eleanor's way. But there was a new respect in her eyes, a shift in the power dynamic that had governed our relationship for decades. She didn't offer me money for groceries that day, or suggest I apply for a corporate job. She simply said, "It's quite something, Sarah." She left shortly after, a little less composed than when she arrived. Our relationship didn't magically transform into one of perfect understanding. Eleanor still offered unsolicited advice, but her criticisms became less frequent, her tone less condescending. She stopped asking when I was going to get a proper home. She knew I had one. The porcelain bird figurine still sits on her mantelpiece, needing its proper display. But now, I understand that my proper display is entirely my own creation, and it doesn't need her approval to shine.